Everyone is aware, it is 80 years since the Histalkus of Reb Levi Yitzchok. As far as we are concerned, Reb Levi Yitzchok is the individual who gave us the Rebbe, and one doesn't need more than that. However, it's still our obligation, and the Rebbe said it's a schus on the Rebbe himself that we should be studying some of his Torah and learning some of the things that Reb Levi taught. I'll start with a little bit of a biography to get people to know a bit about Reb Levi, and then we're going to go into some heavy mystical details. It's not easy, I must say. The whole topic of Reb Levi and how Levi has Kabbalah, as we'll soon see, is a very, very difficult topic. And it's not something which is at all popular in the Chassidic or the Kabbalistic world. There's only one individual that I know that came to see the Rebbe. I think it was in the late 50s or the early 60s. His name was Reb David Jungreis, Olav Sholem, and he was the Abbezin of the Eda HaCharedis. Now, when I was learning in Teres Emes at that time, this is 1968, we would see him almost every day on the way to the Besdin. And to be quite honest, he looked, if you can look at an American eyes, which that's what I was looking at it, he looked very, very holy. No question about it. He wore an interesting coat, and he was a very, very interesting personality. He came to the Rebbe in Yechidus, and he spent about, I think, 2 hours. The majority of the discussion was about Kabbalah. And he being a Kabbalist, beside being a Goan Adar, an unbelievable, a memory without end. And when he left, the Rebbe told, I think, either Label or somebody else, and he said, the Rebbe said, this is Shenlang. It's been a long time since I met someone like this gentleman. And the way Label said it, or whoever told it over, the Rebbe said it reminded him of his father. That's the only person I know who ever the Rebbe actually said those words, which just gives you a little bit of an inclination of what kind of a personality of Levi is that you have to wait 40 or 50 years to actually find out. Now, Levi, of course, was a Ben Achaben from the Alter Rebbe, and of course, he was an Einikl of the Tzemach Tzedek. He was born on Yud Ches Nisan, 1887, and we don't know much about his youth. We know that he came from good stock, the Zayder, Avram David Lavut, and all the other different relatives that he had, Baruch Sholem. His father, they say, Baruch Sholem, was a very jovial individual, good sense of humor, Aida Boki Bishas, and the Rebbe Rashab liked him very, very much. But he was an interesting character. I mean, why? How do I know? I mean, I'm not, those years. But the amount of information that I've gleaned over the years, being in Kfar Chabad, being yeshiva, meeting people who met Reb Leivik, Rashag met Reb Leivik, Mendel Futvas was close to Reb Leivik, Reb Simcha Garadetsky was close to Reb Leivik. Reb Leivik had a lot of friends, and I met many people in Edelkop, many people who were with the Reb Leivik, and as a result of that, they gave over different stories. Then later, when the Yagdil Torah came out, the journal which was published in New York, there was a reshima of someone writing about Reb Leivik. Now, it was very clear from the very, very beginning that Reb Leivik was a masmid oyem v'neira. It wasn't one of these, 9-to-5 people. And the story is told that usually a regular night, 18 hours was garnished with garnished. That wasn't considered to be hasmoda, but that was exactly Reb Leivik. And they write there, Rak b'meitzoi Shabbos Kodesh. Only when it comes to Meitzoi Shabbos Kodesh, Megala atzmoi tzas. He reveals himself, he verbrings. Don't forget, Reb Levi was a very, very social individual, speaking to people, had very, very good skills with having to do with many, many people, etc. And as a result of that, whenever he verbrenged, people would listen with great attention. And as a result of that, they would try to grab whenever it was possible. But of course, as I said before, if a person's learning 18 hours a day, he doesn't have any time for Dvarim B'Telem or, Stam Shmuzin. Now, the question is, as it was a few years ago in Oretz HaTmimim, if he's born at Lamed Ches, and Chetmimim started in Nun Zayin, did Reb Levi actually go and study in Lubavitch? We know that he went to Lubavitch many, many times. And as a result of that, the question was, did he actually study under whoever was at the time, whether it was Greinem or somebody else? The consensus of opinion is that you have to somehow prove your point that he was a student in Chetmimim. There's no raya. We don't have any lists of the Talmidim, and therefore, even though the Rebbe, he was very close to the Rebbe Rashabas, we'll soon see later, we don't have clear a raya, a proof 100% that he actually learned in Chetmimim. How he got into Kabbalah is a very good question. I mean, nobody really knows. The Rebbe, in all the times the Rebbe spoke about his father, very rarely did he actually speak, who did he study under? Friedrich in his eulogy, which is published in Kevis Lubavitch, says he was a Talmud by Rabbi Yael Padabranker, Rabbi Yael Chaikin. He gives a different chassidim that the Rebbe's Reb Levi studied under, but there is no proof one way or another that he was learning by Ela Mekubolim. There were a few Mekubolim at the time. I think it was Leib Hoffman and a few others who were from the Rebbe Marash's time. Because don't forget, in Lubavitch, till Chetmimim started, I don't want to use this expression, they were very liberal. That means people learned Shalah, people learned a lot of Sfarim, which today, you'll ask a Lubavitchers, what are these Sfarim? And they'll tell you, I've never seen them, I never heard of them, and therefore, don't ask me. But once upon a time, Lubavitch was extremely open-minded, and many different Sfarim were used. And as a result of that, it's quite possible. Now, of course, Reb Levi's Bekias in Sifrei Kabbalah is unbelievable. Talk about the Zayar, talk about other Sfarim, as we'll soon see. But how he got into this whole business of Kabbalah, we don't really know. His Pius Chassidus is also unbelievable. The quotations of Likutei Torah that you have, and all the other Maimorim. And Baruch Hashem, a very close friend of mine who passed away at a very young age and is missed very, very much by everyone, Rabbi Yeshua Monshein Olav Shalom, actually wrote a Mafteches on the Reb Levi Yitzchok and a very, very beautiful introduction. And the Rebbe thanked him profusely. I remember the Fabrengen that he went over, the Rebbe called him over and gave him from his kos. And he was one of the first guys who got us interested in Reb Levi Yitzchok in general, because it is not an easy limud whatsoever. Not at all. And even though the Oris and Tanya are short, one example the Alter Rebbe gives, get the Sefer Torah, that you have to have, when you begin writing a get or you write a Sefer Torah, there has to be kavanah lishma. So the Rebbe's father says clearly that why does the Alter Rebbe choose this get and Sefer Torah? Asur mirah v'asei toiv. The get is the ra, and the Sefer Torah is the toiv. Now that's short, sweet, and to the point. Kardom lachpa boy. There's a Mendel Futterfatz once said over here from Leivik that the kardom is not a metzias by itself. There are easy ways the Rebbe has when he gives the bracha for a kosher and freilich and Pesach. So the Rebbe quotes his father in saying that kosher is kemoisei shalol rav, the concept of nitzotzos, and a very nice vertlach that you will find from time to time. But the major times, whenever Reb Levi goes to town, it is a major, major undertaking to get what Reb Levi is actually saying. Reb Levi marries the daughter of Meir Shlomi Anofsky, and I don't know if he's a Yoshev in Lubavitch, but he, at the end of the day, has Kest, his father-in-law, gives him enough money, and he's able to sit and to study. A few years later, the Rebbe's first son, the Rebbe in the Siderenu, was born, And afterwards, the Rebbe Rashab pushes very much and very hard that the Rebbe should become a rabbi in Yekaterinoslav. Now, at that time, this is right after Tomchei Tmimim was founded, the yeshiva grew. In the heyday, you had over 400 Talmidim who packed the Zal. And as my Shver would say over from Elter Chassidim, that when the Tmimim came back to their homes, the Talmidim of the Tzemach Tzedek, Chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek, did not open their mouths. They kept quiet. And the Bochrim who came from Tomchei Tmimim, they were the ones who farbrengt when they came home. Now, they didn't always come home, because don't forget the story that I heard from Shlomo Chaim. Shlomo Chaim arrived in Lubavitch. He did not come from a Lubavitcher family. And eventually, he didn't go home the first year because he did not want to miss what was Pesach, I think, miss being by the Rebbe. Where's the mechanic here? Or whatever he is. And he didn't go home the first year, Pesach. No, came the second year, he also didn't go home. Came the third year, why should he go home? There's a Maimer, Pesach, Shvishal Pesach. And as a result of that, 4 or 5 years go, and the guy never goes home. And plötzlich he realizes, he has a mother and a father. It's a mitzvah to go and actually be mechabed kibbud avaim. And he goes back, and his mother opens the door, and she says, yes, can I help you? And he says to his mother, Mama, das bin ich, Shlomo Chaim. Oh, wow. And she goes crazy and jumps up and down. And that was the first time in 5 years she saw him. He came with a beard. And the mice with Joseph Atzadik were left without a beard and came with a beard. All this time, we don't have to be a big Novi to realize that. He is learning constantly. And he gets smicha from Chaim Brisker, from Yochai Meisels. And he goes around. He's not only in Russia, he goes to Varsha. And he goes to Lubavitch regularly. And there is a threesome, a troika, which in Lubavitch becomes the, how would you call them in modern day English? The three big shot, the three tenors. Those of you who are into music know that there's such a thing called the three tenors, which was rather made by Gorman and the Schechter family. They started the three tenors. But the ones that were there were three people. Now, Nissen Gordon, those of you who know, Rabbi Gordon's uncle, in 1963 in the Yiddish Haim, started writing a biography of the Rebbe. Now, in those times, the Rebbe was Magia, the Yiddish Haim, almost from page to cover. And when he told the Rebbe he wants to write a biography, the Rebbe said, okay, but I'm not going to be Magia. The biography, so don't even think about it. He went to the Rebbe's mother, the Rebbe Sechano Sholem, and she gave the Rebbe a lot of information, which was published in 3 or 4 different articles in the Yiddish Haim. Now, in that article, you had some very interesting people actually discussing different situations, Avram Mayor and then Zalman Duchman, who had good memories and remembered what went on in Lubavitch. And by the time they're talking about, so you're now talking about, let's say, the Nuns and the Tzamachs, and of course, when Samach Vovis said, you had 3 Chassidim who everybody knew were the top 3 of Lubavitch. One of them was, of course, Reb Levi. The second one was Reb Mendel Chaim. And the third one was Reb Zalman Schneerson. These 3, the Rebbe Rashab said different things about each one. One of the things he said, that when they ask a question, you have to think before you answer. Reb Zalman was a Goan and Nigla and Chassidus. One of his most famous Talmidim, of course, Wolf Greenglass, who wrote a biography, a shtickle of Reb Zalman. It was an unbelievable individual. He was an Eidim by a gentleman called Diskin. Diskin was one of the richest Jews in Poland, and he took the best Eidims from the whole of Poland. He had Reb Chaim Heller, who happened to be my Sandik. My father was Sandik Kedushin. And he took Zalman Schneerson, and the third one I don't remember. But Diskin was a big Veer, and he was able to pay for an Eidim, whatever he wanted, he paid the money. And Zalman Schneerson lived in Lodz, and Reb Wolf was very, very close and was very, very interested in everything that Zalman did. He writes a different minhagim, tashlich, and all kinds of very interesting things that Reb Wolf actually wrote down. But these 3 were the biggest ones that we have. Mendel Chaim was a Goan, a Nigla, and a Chassidus, an orator par excellence. And Reb Chaim Brisker wanted to be Meshadech with Reb Mendel Chaim, because he realized that the Mendel Chaim is somebody special and somebody unique. Famous story, which many of you may know, that once they had a machlokes whether the Rosh says something or not. And Reb Chaim Brisker said, "No, the Rosh sagt es nicht. The Rosh doesn't say so." And Mendel Chaim said, "I beg your pardon, the Rosh does say so." And everybody goes to sleep. In the middle of the night, Reb Chaim Brisker bangs on Reb Mendel Chaim's door and says, "Mendel isn't gerecht. The Rosh actually says it, and I was wrong." Reb Mendel Chaim was murdered. He didn't want to go. He was walking down the street, and there was some goyim, versteht with machine guns and everything else. And there was a church right next to him, and he could have walked in and saved himself. He didn't want to, and him and the guy next to him were also murdered, and the Rebbe Rashab was shattered. And famous word, says, "Adur geglitscht the fingers." He fell through my fingers. But these three were the big shots in Lubavitch, and they were considered to be, he was my Mekubal, the Rebbe called Reb Levi my Bal Kabbalah, and Bal Nigel was Mendel Chaim, and the third one was Reb Zalman Schneerson. Eventually, the Reb Levi, the Rebbe Rashab pushed Reb Levi to take the Rabbonis in Yekaterinslav. There was other Rabbonim there. There was a guy called Gelman. He was a Litvische guy, but seemed to be a nice chappy, it seems. And they got along quite well. Eventually, when he passed away, Reb Levi became the Rav of the whole city and stayed there for 35 years. The Rebbe many times would actually discuss different things that happened in his hometown. Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky, the shliach today in Yekaterinslav, when we went into Yechidus, the Rebbe asked him about a certain street. He says, "There's a shortcut. Is it still there?" He doesn't talk about, and he said, "Yeah, the shortcut is still there, and people actually use it." When Reb Levi came to Yekaterinslav, the shul that he davened on was not a Nuschari shul, but there were other shuls. Sometimes he would daven here, sometimes he would daven there. One of the things that I was zoiche when I lived in England was that Rabbi Karnofsky, the Rav of Central, his great-grandfather was a son of Reb Osher Nikolaev. Osher Nikolaev is the one we have in Yotanya, who spent 7 days in the printing press in Vilna, did not eat for a whole week. And Friday night he came to the Rebbe Rashab, and the Rebbe Rashab told him what to do, how to eat, etc., etc. But he's part in the first page, is Osher on the Shub, the Nikolaev, and his son lived in London. His name is Shmuel Grossman, a very, very nice chap, Sheikhet, and he lived in London. And from him I heard many, many stories which are already published in Toldos Levi Yitzchok, written by Gottlieb. Now, a story which not many people know is that this Naftali Tzvi Gottlieb was a Yerushalayim Jew. He wore a stramel, with the Shabbos he wore a jebeh and the whole business. And he was niskarev to Lubavitch. And he was a writer par excellence. And he wrote for different magazines, from magazines. And when he went to Yechidus the first time, someone had suggested to him that, why don't you write a book on Reb Levi? So he thought, I'll ask the Rebbe. So when he went by Koshel Bracha, he said that someone suggested to him that he writes a book about Reb Levi. Does the Rebbe think it's a good idea? And the Rebbe says, very good idea. I'll let you know. 1 year went by, 2 years went by, 3 years went by, 10 years went by. And then he comes a second time. He didn't do anything because the Rebbe didn't tell him to do anything. Comes by the second time. And all of a sudden, the Rebbe says, Nu vu de bichel. Where's the book? So he gives a big smile. And then he started to gather information all over the place on Reb Levi. By this time, the Rebbetzin had passed away, the Rebbetzin Chana. And as a result of that, you can't ask the Rebbe, what'd your father do this? What'd your father do this? So then he just had to get whoever he could get his hands on. This Shmuel Grossman knew a lot about Reb Levi, and he told me, I wrote it down, and I sent it to this Gottlieb fella, and he actually puts it in. Australia is mentioned in the book because my shver, Olav Sholem, was in Yechidus once. My shver was in Buffalo, as you know, for many years, and the Rav there was a guy called the Beirish Tzukerman. The Beirish Tzukerman was a Belzer Chosid, a Grace Bal Hiroah. In the book, those of you who've read the book on my father-in-law, Larger Than Life, in the back there are letters. You take a look every single time my shver gets a letter from the Rebbe, Limser Dash Loharadab Tzukerman Sheyichya. Every letter, not one letter do you find that the Rebbe doesn't say, please give over Agris to Rav Tzukerman, the Friedrich Rebbe said on him, Erizarov. And he's a choshev, very choshev guy. And the Rebbe asks my Shvez, when Zuckerman makes a get, he lived in Buffalo, which is then a thriving Jewish community. He asked him, does your Rav fast? Because the Tata Olav Hashem, that means a Bleivik, used to say that a get is a period for Shem Havaya, Ish v'isha shchuyra b'neim. But then when there's a period, when there's a get, you're supposed to fast. So the Rebbe said that during his period, when the Reb Levi was in Yekaterinoslav, was the First World War, and then there was a very big influx of Litvische Rabbonim and Litvische Eden, yeshivas. Telz was there for a while. The Rebbe Tzachana, when they used to bring the buses, it used to be Telz sometimes, used to have the buses in Crown Heights to go to Cleveland. And the Rebbe used to say, the Rebbe Tzachana says, reminds of us given in the Haim that they had the same thing. So good, they kommen da. She was quite happy that they go out from here. But the Chaim Ezer also came to Yekaterinoslav, and I heard this from Rav Zevin's grandson, from Nochem, that there were many asifas of Rabbonim in Russia. And he said, Reb Chaim Ezer, even though he was not a chassid, he was a nice fellow, he wasn't a misnagid in any way, form, or fashion. But Reb Chaim Ezer would not start an asifa until Reb Leivik actually came. That means he had unbelievable derech for Reb Leivik, and all the asifas, we have the lists that the Chaim, when they would not start any asifas till Reb Levi came. Just to give you a little bit, one Maisa, which is an unbelievable story. This I heard the name of Zalman Butman Olav Hashem. There was a asifa in Moscow that was called by the Frierdiker Rebbe. This was already after the communists had already taken over, but it seems that they were able to somehow, have an asifa to get around to discuss the problems that Yiddishkeit was having at that time. And everybody, Zalman Duchman was given the task of getting everybody a place to sleep, etc., etc. So they gave Reb Leivik a room and this place. They rented a house or whatever it is. So Reb Leivik said, whose pillow is going to be on the bed? So Zalman Duchman said, he went to the next door neighbor and he said, could you borrow me a pillow? So the Rebbe Leivik said very quietly, mein Kopf elech nicht weglegen auf a goyische Kischen. My head, I'm not going to put down on a non-Jewish pillow. Just showing you what the edelkeit of what this man actually was all about. Now, of course, Reb Leivik brought Shachtim, he brought Malamdim, the famous Valenkin family, who became the Rebbe's Malamed, and of course, his Goldschmidt family, who eventually had the schus of becoming Maim Chutonim. And as a result of that, the Shtot had very heavy Lubavitch, presence, and there's a very famous story about the Shoichet, that he had a bissel genudget the Rav a bissel. He drove him a bit up the wall. Rabbonim can sometimes have balabatim like that. There's only shvissen from them. It does happen in almost every community. Now this guy was driving a Bleivik like up the wall. And this Shoichet, Goldschmidt, saw this and was very, very annoyed. So one day I was walking down the street, he sees this fella, and he was carrying his shchita knife. And he goes over to the chap and says, Rabid, ebet nicht ufen mutschen der Rov, elech nitzen mein Messer auf eire Holz. That means if you're not going to stop driving the Rav crazy, I shall use my knife on your neck. And from that moment on, of course, this guy never stepped foot in any place near Reb Leivik. Now, as the years went by, things got worse and worse. Reb Leivik was put under unbelievable pressure. Famous story about the Russian government making sure that there was a meeting. They wanted all the Rabbonim to sign that the things in the Soviet Union are wonderful. It's terrific. You can get schmaltz whenever you want, and it's gewaldig. And Reb Leivik forbade any Rav to sign anything. And then, of course, that was one of the things held against him all the years, because he would not allow such a thing. And then there was a caricature. It's even published, I think, in Reb Levi Yitzchok, of the Rabbonim sitting there and the guys with guns telling him to sign, which went into newspapers all over Europe, and which caused the Russian government a lot of agmas nefesh, whatever it was. Then there's a famous story that everyone had to fill out a paper to say whether you believe in God or not. And Reb Levi got up Shabbos shul and said that everybody has to write that they're ma'aminim. So later, when the KGB asked him, what kind of business is that? He said, well, you have to tell the government the truth. You can't lie to the government. Now, this went on, and things did not work out very good. The Russians and the communists and NKVD and the HVS and all of these organizations. And eventually, Reb Levi was arrested, and he was sent for 5 years to prison. Now, one of the most beautiful letters we have of Reb Levi is when he got out of prison. He writes a reshima about himself. Ani Levi Yitzchok ben Zelderochel, very interesting, which we'll discuss in a moment. Now, while the Reb Levi was in Yekaterinoslav, there were many problems dealing with the communists. Famous story about the minyan. He had 9 people for a wedding. Downstairs there was a communist, and he banged on his door and he said, I need a 10th person for a minyan, which, you could ask yourself is absolutely madness. But whatever it is, he did. And the guy came and he made the wedding. There was a very famous Yiddish writer called Peretz Markish, who was one of the most famous Yiddish writers. He was also killed later by the communists. And his father had passed away in Yekaterinoslav, and Reb Levi made the wedding, made the levaya, and he was very nespoiled for Reb Levi, and he sent him some money, etc., to help him out. The famous story that Rebbe told Chalamoid Pesach was with the matzahs. Now that story is like unbelievable when you think about it, because at the end of the day, nobody in Russia was given permission to have matzahs, and here Reb Levi told him that he wants to have certain mashgichim, and he wants to have certain conditions, and unless that, he's not going to give a hechsher. End of story. Now, you think about it for a moment. To us, it sounds, a nice fairy tale. But what's going on over here? Anybody is shot, anybody they don't like, they send away to the gulags, etc., etc. My matzah, the matzahs, the sport from the matzahs, who cares? But you think about it, it has no seichel. And Reb Levi got gestanen, and as a result of that, they sent from Moscow that unless Reb Levi is maskim to the mashgichim and this and that was a time when they had no wheat. Because don't forget, Russia had sent all the wheat to the West in order to have cash to buy the machinery. And yet, Reb Levi hat sich nicht gebeugen, kihu zenicht. And as a result of that, the matzahs were, that year, Reb Levi was able to have those matzahs. One of the greatest tragedies, the Rebbe said this to more than one person, is that he never got his father out of Russia. The Rebbe had unbelievable agmas nefesh. There's a letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe where the Rebbe is mischanen, actually begs the Frierdiker Rebbe. I don't know what he means by that. The Frierdiker Rebbe, what is he going to do? He didn't have a political clout that he could get to father, but you can see very clearly that the Rebbe said the biggest regret he has that he was not able to get his father out, which of course, even to the wedding, the government did not let the Reb Levi, neither they let the wife, which was very interesting. One let the wife, maybe she thought that the government didn't want anybody to have any nachas whatsoever. The Rebbe eventually gets married, and you see from the letters of Reb Levi an unbelievable emotional side of Reb Levi, the language, the outpouring. And he writes that when I wrote the telegram of 101 words, and then I wrote it in Latin letters because the post office, I don't believe, had guys who were no Israelis then. And as a result of that, he had to write it in Latin. And the Rebbe writes about how with the deepest emotion, I poured my whole heart and soul into that letter. And don't forget, the Rebbe did not sign Shneesim because he wanted to be 101, Al Pi Kabbalah, etc., etc., etc. Eventually, Reb Levi passes away after he's taken in the city of Chile. He's brought then to Almaty. The Raskin family helps him very much. There was a guy, Rabinowitz, who helped very much. There were a lot of guys who helped. The Raskins were very, very involved. The Goreliks, Gershom Mendel's father was there, plus others. And by that time, the Rebbe was, his whole body was full of cancer. And as a result of that, he was getting worse and worse, and he could only swallow, and people stood by him for days on end trying to help him and give him food, etc., etc., etc. I heard this from Shalom Beraskin, my Mechitin, who said, you know, when a person is locked up in a prison, let's say for 5 years, and he has nobody to talk to, but his mind is full of thoughts, full of ideas. So what do you do when you leave the prison? So whoever you meet. So Shalom Ber used to tell me, I used to see and they took, what they did was, they smuggled Reb Levi out of Chile and brought him to Almaty, and he was, the first few months was Nisan time. So the first Nisan and year, he was able to speak, he was able to walk around a bit. And so I was walking in the streets, says Shalom Ber, and he was a kid of 16, 17, not older. And Reb Levi was coming towards him, and they had met Reb Levi, they had the minyanim, etc. And he started talking to me. No, Sam, how long do you talk to someone who you meet on the street? 5 minutes, 10 minutes. He said, over an hour. Und ich habe verstanden gar nicht, because I Kabbalah mit Chassidus, and an hour, but I couldn't say, you know, I got to go home, you know. He couldn't say that. And he says it was unbelievable. There was a joke, and I don't know if it's a joke, but when Shmuel Grossman came to the United States to the Rebbe for the first time, so of course he went into the Rebbe's Chana, and they spoke about, so the Rebbetzin, so Shmuel Grossman said to the Rebbe's mother, the Siches and a ganz lang, that the Rebbe speaks for a long time. So the Rebbetzin Chana said, the Tata Tazegit. Father also spoke for a long time, did not have any, there's no such thing as short situations as far as that was concerned. The Rebbetzin was very annoyed when there was a certain chassid called him Leivik, and she got very, very angry and said, that's not the way you call my husband. And he told the fakir that this was, you know, like a nickname, which everybody, when they said Leivik, they knew who they were actually talking about. Okay. Eventually, he passes away on Chaf Av. Very famous story that the Rebbe did not go to work that day, and they found him in his office, and they brought him the telegram that his father had passed away. So someone asked him, you know, why did you actually not go to work? He said, I feel that there's something which is not right. And as a result of that, he was buried in Almaty, and the Rebbe asked the Gerelik, who is here, Rabbi Lazar, Olav Shalom, to make sure that you get a Shem Shabbos to actually make the Matzeva, which they did, and the Rebbe wanted to pay for it, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Now, when you take a look at Reb Levi's Torah, you have to understand as follows. We have Pshat, Remesh, Drush, and Sod. Now, when you go to Pshat Mikra, Rashi, Ramban, Ibn Ezra, no problem. Remez is all kinds of, you can play around with Remez, and you can end up who knows what, Eves, a Katzti Bechaya, the small kuf, or, you know, you can, whenever you talk about Remez, you take the Balaturim, and you can find unbelievable pshatim. In Reb Levi's Torah, you find the most phenomenal mathematical atbashes, Gematrias without end. And just like the Rogatchover, in the Horas Hatmima, those of you who actually read the literature, you should. Some of the articles are quite good. The Rogatchover writes, that the Rambam writes that the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, so the Rogatchover immediately quotes the Gemara in Shabbos, when the Gemara said the Ger came to Hillel and said, Lamdeni Torah al regel achas, and he told the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael. So that's the mocker of the Rambam. But the Rogatchover also, there's nothing, Sefri, Sefrot, Sefta, Mechilta, Zayar Rakia from the Tashbitz. The Rogatchover has some language that he attacks someone who didn't want to accept the Zayar Rakia, Shlomo ibn Gibriel, and says, Agoy na Kodesh Hazeh. The Rogatchover gets very, very annoyed. And fakert, other people who wrote, for example, on the Rambam, the Narboini, the Rogatchover, you know, says the guy doesn't know what he's talking about, etc., etc. But there are people that the Rogatchover is Kochsech Yudah Levi. We now found that it was printed in Eretz Yisrael. He wrote on the Yudah Levi Ha'oris, etc., etc. And there's no boundaries. That means Rogatchover can find you at the Sefta in Kalim and bring it together. Whatever, there's a word somewhere, and even Kabbalah. Rogatchover, the Rambam says you have to have 30 Cyrus on your payas. Now, where do you have that in Bavli Yerushalmi? And you don't. And the answer is, he writes, V'cheinu b'sifrei HaKabbalah, the Rogatchover writes that in Softas Panech, on the spot, that is Api Kabbalah. Now, Reb Levi, at the end of the day, has Remozim, Gematrios, which can knock you out from anything. And as Monsheim quotes in the beginning of his Akdoma, that we nowadays like to play around with Gematrios. I remember I used to go to a certain chuppahs or the chasanas. So there were guys who would tell me, at the chasan and the kala, you get the name and double it, and you get chasan v'kala mazel tov. You know, all kinds of unbelievable things. Very geschmack. Baba meises von ane bis sofa macht nicht stoit. But that's what they did. The Pardes give 7 different types of Gematrios. The Rebbe has in one sicha, where he talks about Hallel, Shnoisav Shel Aroin, and the Rebbe writes something there. This is the same Gematria. It's Kuf Lamed Zayin or something. That's the many psukim in Hallel. Vim Toisi Iti Tolen Mishugosi. The Rebbe asks for Mechila. I mean, what's the big deal? So, I mean, it's 127, like a big deal. But you see, the Rebbe did not like, just throwing around Gematrias. 770, the Rebbe accepted Gematria Faratsto, which was done by an English Bochagrad. But whatever it is, but the Bleivik's Gematrias. Just let me give you, I found an unbelievable type of situation. We know that how many times did Yankiv bow down to Esav? Gentlemen, do you remember? 7, right? Now, Yitzchok is 208. Now, he says, of course, it was Shem Havaya times 8. Reb Levi is, I don't know about maths, but the man's way of being able to figure out mathematically, it's like Melig Vul. So Esav is 182, which is 7 times. And then how much do you have? Esav, which is more than the Shem Havaya, is 350. Take away 26. And all of a sudden he makes puts together, and you have that Esav Tomei 7 times is 50, 7 times 50 is 350, and that should take away from Esav the 26, so you have 350, and that's why he was the 7 times he bowed down, 7 times 50 is 350, so therefore he was able to Nichmur Rachamov, and as a result of that, he became soft, and he was able to kiss, to kiss Yaakov Avinu. Now, who in their wildest dreams would make up such a way out situation? Then he quotes a Gemara in Avodah Zorah. One Avodah Zorah Avches says as follows, that there was a war between the Yevonim and the Romans, and they had fights for years gone end, and then all of a sudden they made peace with the Jews, and as a result of that, for 26 years, everybody lived happily ever after, Shem Havaya. I mean, this you find in the hundreds, whenever you have any type of gematrias, whenever you have atbashes, whenever you have any type of Roshit Tevis, the Reb Levi goes to town in the most unbelievable ways. He finds gematrias without end. And then, of course, the Milui Shem Havaya and the Ribua, or the Atbash, or the Reish Nun Aleph Shorim, Holav V'Ocher. And, at the end of the day, you go Mamash Meshuga. Yitzchok, let's say, let's take a look over here, is 8 times Shem Havaya, Yaakov is 7 times, Esav is 6 times. And he quotes it Zoya. Now, Reb Levi has no, has no, fear of saying Pshat and Zoya. Now, the problem with the Zoya is as follows. We have many Pirushim on the Zoya, starting from the Mikdash Melech. The Ramak, interesting, the Ramak wrote a beer on the Zohar, which is very much like Reb Levi's style. It was not printed. It started out printing in the 60s. And I know that the Rebbe gave some money towards it. Already there must be at least 30 or 40 volumes, big browns for him. So there's a Zohar, Reb Chia, Reb Yitzchok, and Reb Yossi met Reb Abba. Now, any time Reb Levi has names, he goes to town. Whenever you have a name, why is this name saying this pshat in this zoyar? So he brings the whole business. They were talking about Yitzchok, Yankov, and Yosef, and as a result of that, he shows you that why did Yitzchok said what he said, why did Reb Chia say what Yankov was supposed to say, and why Reb Yosef said what Reb Yosef. That means there's no such thing that it just happened to be that this rabbi said this and that rabbi said that. And as a result of that, you have every single thing, every prat, protiyim, is by the Reb Levi means something, and there's a connection. He will find a connection, whether it's a Kisva Rizal, whether it's a Gemara, whether it's a Gematria. You will never find, and you'll never have a situation where he does not find a kesher, and from all over Kisva Rizal, in Safra Tzniusa and Zoya, well, Kutetera, for example, I once heard this, I heard from Mendel Futafas once, printed in the book also, and tell us that, what's a Maimer? So after the Maimer, someone came over to him and said, where'd you get that from? So he opened the Kutetera and he showed him 2 lines of a horror of the Tzemach Tzedek. I mean, Reb Levik's, first of all, the Pekiyos and the Kutetera and Sifrei Chassidus and Tanya, hundreds of times, and he builds up, but whenever you have a place, that they went to this place. Why did they go to this place? Why is this place mentioned? There's no such thing as something is mentioned just because it happened to be. Another example, which is very, very interesting. The Gemara, not so many places, says the word bedusahi. Bedusa means it's like a joke, or it's not really real. So there's a famous letter. What's interesting is that the Rebbe Tzachana told people, it was known, that Reb Levi wrote thousands and thousands of pages. I heard in the name of Reb Zalman Butman that the Rebbe Levi had a Gemara, that says the size of a Gemara, a biur on Eitz Chaim, which is a famous svarim of the Arizal. He was chicken to take it out of Russia because he was worried he was going to get arrested. So therefore he left it in Russia, and who knows what happened. What we have is number one, the famous Zoya. Those of you who had the schus of seeing it, I did. The Rebbe had no ink, had no paper. So what did you do? There's an interesting Shais Teshuvos, we have it in the Kol, I think, called Chaye Olam Nota. A Rav, a Russian Rav, and he had no paper. No, he wanted to write Shuvas, he wanted to write Chidush Torah. So what do? So next to him was a, what's it called in English? A shooting range. So there was paper, and the guys would come take practice on the whatchamacallit. So at night he would go, take off the paper, and write his Chidush Torah with the guns in the middle. How people had, we don't understand, like a piece of paper, the Rebbe is Bechlam Makpid on every single piece of paper. The Rebbe never throws out any paper. But at the end of the day, Levi had no paper, so he wrote on the Zohar, no, you have to get ink. Now you're going to get ink. So the Rebbe used to tell the story, and I saw the Zohar itself. It's beautiful. It's yellow, green, red. The Rebbe's mother would go out and find grass and mix it with the water, and all of a sudden you had gorgeous ink, mamish gorgeous, and he filled up whatever room he had on the Zohar, he filled it up. But when he had time, there was no bekitzer. There was 25 pages on one shtickle Zohar, a little bit, and for 25 pages, the Rebbe goes the place, the people who spoke about it, what was this connection to that, and the Rebbe just goes on and on and on without. I'll give you another example. Yosef, Moshe, and David all passed away on Mincha time. Now, there are 5 types of minchas, and if you take it, it gives a gematria here of 5 times mincha. Something comes up, unbelievable. And why is it these 5? Because there's 5 different solas, machves, halas, and rekikin, etc., etc. There's no whatchamacall. There's no limit to what the Reb Levi could actually do. Mitzrayim, he goes a whole business with mates is in the 130, and then you get another 210. You multiply that by 5 times Shem Havaya, and you get Mitzrayim with Keya. You got all kinds. There's nothing that holds. There's no limitations to the man's understanding and knowledge and being able to put together, and it's an unbelievable. Now, the Rebbe once said on the Rogatchover that Bikiyim, those who know the texts, have been a lot. But the greatest of the Rogatchover was that he took a piece of Gemara and he could find 20 ideas on that piece of Gemara. Chotzi Shir. We have a machlekes, Shleishish Leyechanan, Chotzi Shir, Mutar min HaTorah, Osur min HaTorah. What's Chotzi Shir mean? You have a half of a Shir, not a whole Shir. So Rogatchover then goes, Agans Lomdus, what does it mean? Backwards and forwards. And he comes to Agans Lomdus, about, which means you have to take a look at a Gemara. The Gemara says, let's say, let me take an example. Pachas mikazayis, or more than a kazayis. Or what does it mean? What can we glean from it? The Rogatchover brings, for example, Zimun is 3. So Rogatchover brings a Maisa when you have the sprinkling of the Parah Aduma, so the what's it called, the hyssop, what's it called again? The Ezoi is 3. So Rogatchover puts, what does an Ezoi for Parah Aduma have to do with a Zimun? Talking about benching. And you talk about, but the Rogatchover, hey, he'll find you something. That you got 3 over here, you got 3 over there, you got a common denominator, and you keep on going. And the God just keeps on going more and more and more in every way that you actually have it. Now, once the Rebbe gets, the Reb Levi gets out of prison, so he gets to Almata, and then he starts writing to the Rebbe. Now, I mentioned before that the Rebbe Tzachana was very, very wanted that some of Reb Levi's things should be printed. And what's very strange was that, first of all, they didn't have much of Reb Levi. The only thing they had was the Rebbe's letters, the Reb Levi's letters to the Rebbe. From Peches, you have about 15, 16, 17 letters, quite long, and that's what they had. The Rebbe had them. Now, the Rebbe had them all the years. And you could ask yourself a very simple question. Why didn't the Rebbe print them? It's a good question. I don't know if anyone can actually give an answer. But as eventually, as I mentioned a few years, Yud Aleph Nissen, there's one place that Rebbe did print something, and that was a year or 2 years after Reb Levi passed away, in the Agoda Shel Pesach, where we have Kadesh Urchatz, Karpas, etc., etc. Why is there Rachatz and Rochzo, some whatever, Shamaita Babi Mori, Al Derech Hasod? And I believe that the Rebbe wanted to somehow, 2 years after his father passed away, to actually put something in. But none of the letters were ever published. The Maimorim, Rabbi Yoel Sholem, says something very interesting. He says, in the Maimorim of the Rebbe, you don't have Reb Levi till much, much later. But Rabbi Yoel says the reason for this is that anything which is mentioned in a Maimor has got to be, sifted to be perfect from beginning to end. And up until a certain period, the Rebbe Weiss didn't think that, but later, say in the Maimorim and say in the Michtav Kloliim, you see the Reb Levi mentioned again and again and again. And then, all of a sudden, out of the blue, his mother eventually passed away without seeing any published items. The Rebbetzin had, the Tzachana had in a house, a Yalkut Shimoni, which the Rebbe had, which Reb Levi had in Almata. And also, there was some Torah that she had, which she didn't even realize that she had. It's only after she passed away and they went looking for the stuff in the house did they realize it existed. And later they found bits and pieces. There's a Haskama, famous Haskama, that Reb Levi has on the Haggadah, Tzuf Amorim, which the Rebbe quoted in one of the Fabrengen's Pesach by night. There's also a letter for guys collecting money for Kerel Chabad, etc. Then all of a sudden, Shazar got the Rebbe the Zohar that was in Almatah. The Rebbe Tzachana was frightened to leave with any Sforim, so she left whatever she left there, or she gave it to her friends, or whatever it was. And Shazar was able to get the Zohar, and the Zohar came to the Rebbe, and it took a long time. You don't see that the Rebbe was burning to actually go and to publish it. Why? You can only, anybody can make up whatever excuse he wants to make up. What's interesting is that when the Rebbe came to Paris in 47, so we have different Farbrengens, and there in Paris, you see that the Rebbe copied exactly what his father used to do. He asked people their names. Your name is this, then he would say, walk around and he'll make you're this madrege and you're that madrege, it's not the Rebbe's style at all. I mean, anybody who compares it's completely worlds apart. And then the Rebbe says sometimes, someone told me, one of the Goldhirschers told me that in their hair, there's a word that the reason why sometimes the Rebbe says some of the things I don't, since he was not Meirech, so I don't know exactly what he actually means, what's going on. But there is a statement that the Rebbe Tzachana, when she came to America, and she was talking, I don't know who she said this to, she says, Ander will sagen, as dem Taten sa Chossid. There are people who want to say that he's his father's Chossid. Und ich sage dem schwer sa Chossid. That he said that he's a schwer Chossid. For example, when Yankov got married, where was his parents? Back home, didn't come to the wedding. So Reb Levi mentions that in the thing, that when my son got married, I wasn't there either. My mother was there. I just want to finish with an unbelievable, the letters that the Rebbe writes, that the Levi writes to the Rebbe, sometimes are just mind-boggling. And you have this David Dubov, so sein gesund, who's put together Sforim, it's like beyond. And it's just, if you got patience and you're into this, the Rebbe said on Rabbi Yoel, the Rebbe was very nispol, that Rabbi Yoel, he said, Mele, the Siches na Maimorim, but the Tatens, the Zan Azei Bokin, and Tatens Sforim, the Eris, the Rebbe said, I never even thought about such a situation. The Rebbe quotes here, Meiser, Isha Niknes, Shleisha Droch, the Mishnah, the beginning of Kiddushin. Kesef B'Biyah B'Shtar. So all of a sudden, you start here, and he goes through how many questions? Number one, why does it say Shleisha? What's Shleisha so important? Why does the Seder go like that? Why everything is B'diuk, Kesef, Biyah, and Shtar? Why is the way the Psukim have that? And he gives you 26 questions. Reish Mekadesh and Niknes. Why does it say Niknes and Mekadesh? What is the Pirush Kicha or Kach? Now, anybody who learns that Gemara, I don't know anybody who would go along and say, why you do this and why you do that. And the Rebbe answers everybody's question. And he goes, and that's how he does with every piece of Gemara. Just say one more piece of Gemara in Sukkah. He has a shtickle here in Sukkah, which is, takes a Gemara. Now, you don't find, basically, Sforim that take a Gemara and do Ampi Kabbalah. So one Sefer Oitza Kovid, Todd Sakein, was a Talmud of the Rashba. He has a little bit, a bit of Kabbalah. A very famous Sefer Tur Barekes, which is on Shulchan Aruch, that he says halachas based on why the halacha goes that way, because Al Pi Kabbalah, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so he brings a Gemara here, Daf Chof, a Mishnah and Sukkah. This is Tafrei Tzadik Zayin. Omer Reb Shimon Ma'aser B'Tevi Avdei. Okay, a Ma'aser B'Tevi, he was sleeping under the Sukkah, and the Kamash Malon ahead at the Baleo La'iba, like on some Ma'aser. Ira Dovar, Shesichas Talmud Chacham Tzarech Limud, that when you have any Talmud Chacham says anything, you need it. And why do they talk about Sukkah? Im Shachenu, Im Shekenu, is B'chol Dovar L'Meir Zeb Sukkah Daf. If you want to bring back answer ayah, that Sichas Talmidei Chachamim, you can learn from them, well, you have to be right in Sukkah. Then he says, why do you bring me a ma'aser with the avodim p'turim and Sukkah and Yoshin Tachas Hamita? Mashmi says, Sichas Talmidei Chachamim, that the words of Talmidei Chachamim, b'yichud have to do with the mitzvah Sukkah. And they have to do, number one, with the avodim, and it has to do with the sleeping under the Sukkah. But Reb Shimon is the one who said it. So then he begins the whole business of what it means Sicha, and what it means Schach. What is Sicha? Sicha is talk, chatter. It's that which you're not allowed to do during davening. Now, what is Schach? It's also not something real, something which is extra, as it says in the Gemara. That's what Schach was all about. On the other hand, Schach is very important. Because that's very deep things. The sukkah, you have to sit under the tzeil. What does the tzeil? Means the shade. Now, the tzeil is a hell of a hester, which is only a horrible bad, and then he sends it to look at the Torah, etc. It's festive. The Varba Alma, and then saying near Sichli, just like the tzeil covers over all kinds of things, so that's the tzeil also. And then it goes on and on and on without end. And the depth and what you get out of it is beyond everything. So in this 80th anniversary of the death of Reb Levi, Baruch Hashem, I had the schus of being at the kaver, and the shliach there, this Danziger, is doing a gewaldige job. The whole city, who's there? Cohen and the other guys that are working very hard in the middle of nowhere. Because don't forget, Asia is not the most exciting place. Almaty is not the most exciting place to live. And people come from all over the world, and they're, Baruch Hashem, building up. And we just have to hope that the more sichas, according to the Rebbitzin, he wrote thousands of pages. And if he wasn't able to write, he would think, and if he was not able to think, he would speak. The personality of an individual who had so much that he wanted to give the world, and we have a little bit, and it's mamash a tipa min hayam, it's mamash drops of the greatness of the individual, which just teaches us the importance of learning and doing the right things, and the Eibush shall help him. So zayin hagut to better for all of us, and we should be zoicha the tchias hamesim. And as the Torah tells us, Mashiach will begala Torah sisrei Torah, and will be zoicha to gilui alikus b'poyel mamash. Thank you very much for listening.
Beautiful.